Earlier today, Todd Howard appeared for yet another Starfield interview, this time on the Kinda Funy Xcast, where he shares a variety of new details on Starfield, and some of the answers he gives here are genuinely interesting. I think we're getting a picture of what exactly planetary exploration in Starfield is going to look like, but also things like mods in Starfield, some of the romance options you will have, and even Todd Howard explaining why exactly Starfield is only going to be 30 FPS on consoles. One of the big questions I've had around Starfield is how impactful are these backgrounds? We know that while you're creating your character, you'll be able to choose a background and it'll automatically give you the first level of a few skills as starting skills to fit that character. And though getting a couple of skills, definitely quite cool, there also is going to be a unique mechanic where depending on your background, you'll have unique dialogue opportunities throughout the game. We saw a few of these during the Direct, but Todd Howard really expands on the role of backgrounds here.
And so I think we've hit a real sweet spot with Starfield with giving you that flavor right out of the gate, where you are going to pick some starting skills with your background, but that also has flavor. People want to role play. They don't want to just see it as a list of numbers. I'm a chef. Okay, what can a chef do? How does that factor into dialogue or other choices in the game?
This quote got me pretty excited, as it basically sounds like Todd Howard is saying your background won't just be some numbered stat changes or only those free skills, but based off his description, I imagine there'll be a fair amount of dialogue and probably some unique interactions like skill checks based off the background you chose. And his referencing about it just not being a numbers thing really makes me feel like there'll be quite a few different interactions you can have based off your background. He continues on to describe how traits in Starfield are definitely a callback to some of the older Fallouts and really described as an opportunity to play the game in a different way, especially on a new playthrough. And the parent trait is loved by Bethesda Game Studios internally. This is known as kid stuff, and it's basically going to give you a set of parents in the world, but due to having those parents, you're going to have to give them some of your money. Although Todd Howard also talks about skills in Starfield.
As opposed to being a strict kind of tree you have to go down, you can say, I want to focus in technology, and then the different tiers of skills will open up, and it gives you flexibility within that. There's 5 of them. You saw that in the Direct. And we are finding here, what you always want is when people are talking about the game, that they're saying, did you know? Did you know you can do this? Or they're comparing characters, and those character builds and those stories feel very, very unique for each person in that conversation.
This is another answer that gets me pretty excited. It seems like the 5 different skill trees are going to be quite distinctive and really have their own identities here. We know Starfield's going to feature 82 skills in total, and it seems like the way you'll unlock these is going to be pretty interesting and a bit different than past games. First, you'll need to spend a perk point to actually unlock the first level of that skill, but then by completing the challenges associated with the skill, you'll rank it up naturally over time. So it seems like you have to start yourself down a certain path, unlocking the first level of skills you want, but as you play, it'll determine how far down that path you go as you level up the skill even further. And with all the fan speculation about being a space pirate, we do have confirmation that Crimson Fleet is really going to be the space pirate faction in Starfield, and you will be able to join them. And Todd Howard describes how they wanted some of the mechanics in the game, like space piracy, to feel really integrated into the game overall, and they have some more features tied to them. So if you are somebody engaging in space piracy, you'll have to worry about some of the contraband scans you'll have to do as you enter certain planets. And with Starfield overall, they wanted to create moments where the players felt like they could really do what they want in the game. And it really sounds like they designed this game with a lot of role-playing possibilities in mind and to be accounted for by the game. We also got some really interesting insight into the balance of procedurally generated planets versus the handcrafted ones, along with some new and genuinely interesting insights about this.
We wanted to do the planets because we like to give you that choice. Where do you want to go? You feel like you would want that choice in a game like this. And so first it was technically, could we pull it off? And, we did technically be able to, draw these planets, make them feel believable on the screen. Now, obviously, it's procedural. Okay, so there's no way we're going to go and handcraft an entire planet. What we do is we handcraft individual locations, and some of those are placed specifically, obviously the main cities and other quest locations. And then we have a suite of them that are generated or placed when you land, depending on that planet. It is a moment when you land on some of these barren planets. And again, we will generate certain things for you to find on them. But if you look at a planet, you see the resources, it has things you want. There is, I love the Buzz Aldrin quote, the magnificent desolation. I think there's a certain beauty to landing on those and feeling I'm one of the only people or the only person to ever visit this planet. If you add too many things, if it's generating too many abandoned bases or towers or things to find, it starts feeling too gamey in some of those locations. So I think we've dialed that in pretty well, but it is an exploration different than we've had, where you're landing, you're exploring around that landing spot, and then you're probably going somewhere else.
Sort of the bat. I actually think it's really interesting how, from an early stage of development, it sounds like Bethesda had this vision in mind. You're gonna have a spaceship, you could fly it around, and you'll be able to dot around to a ton of different planets. It sounds like that was a real core part of Starfield's vision and something they completed early. But thankfully, not all of those planets are going to be completely desolate. Todd Howard further clarifies that about 10% of the planets in Starfield will have some type of life on them. I assume this means either humans or creatures, but technically that isn't clarified. And even beyond just that, Todd Howard starts to describe that they overhauled the random encounter system for Starfield, where it basically seems like when you land on a planet, some things will be randomly generated on that planet right then. So for example, there could be hundreds or even thousands of different things that could spawn in a specific spot, but what spawns there might be different each time or from planet to planet. They basically have a catalog of things that could spawn there, but what spawns on your planet may be slightly different than what spawns on your friend's planet, and so on. This is exactly how things worked in past games, but of course on a much smaller scale, as you were just considering one map at a time. As for an example, here's the Fallout 76 map, and each of these dots is a different random encounter zone, where you'll get something slightly different when you walk there. Could just be enemies to fight, or it could be one of the more memorable or notable interactions that was available in Fallout 76. And you can actually even see this somewhat from the Starfield Direct and the gameplay shared. Here we have the same planet, the same spot on the same planet, but you could see two completely different structures spawned there. So I have to imagine this is an early glimpse at this revamped and perhaps somewhat expanded random encounter system. Although it seems like even beyond that, some planets will just kind of be about the environment and resources, but Todd Howard expands on those ideas here as well.
We have a lot of biomes. We do look at temperature, we look at the radiation, we look at all of those things on a planet so that your suit and your protection, you can get certain ailments if you're not ready, and certain weather things can come through. There are obviously planets that might have one type of biome, and there are planets that have a whole bunch, and their creatures and the plants and everything go with the biome. So there's a whole part of the game where surveying a planet, like discovering all of the flora and fauna and resources. Planets also have traits, usually geological things that are inherent to that planet, and uncovering those. And if you fully survey a planet, that data is actually worth a lot of money, credits in the game that you can sell. So there's a whole part of the game that's really just doing that. It's a little more, I almost describe it Zen-like. The creatures there, some of them can be aggressive, where it can get dangerous. We've actually had a problem at times with the predator creatures going and killing all of the more peaceful creatures you're coming across.
And after hearing all of this, it really does seem like planets will be their own characters in some ways. Do you have the right equipment to even be able to explore there? Is it a planet with bad weather conditions? We've heard of sandstorms being a thing in Starfield from other interviews, or even just the simple question of whether all of those creatures will immediately attack you, or is the view good? I think that's one of the interesting parts of Starfield. Some of you are going to be hearing about this and hearing those features and getting even more hyped, while some others are just like, nah, I don't want anything to do with that. But it does genuinely feel like this game is designed around that, where it has these in-depth systems, but they're largely optional, and there's several of them, so if you're not super interested in planets and base building, perhaps there's spaceships and an expansive story for you to do. Although, one thing explicitly confirmed that I think does shed some light on how this will function is that Starfield will not feature land vehicles, which means that planets are only explorable on foot. Spaceships are just for space. We've heard in the past how there's not going to be that transition from space into your planetary atmosphere like in games like No Man's Sky. And in this interview, Todd Howard describes how the jetpack will act as your vehicle, and there are even some skills around it to make your jetpack more powerful. Based on the gameplay we've seen thus far, it doesn't seem like the jetpack's going to help you move all that much faster. So imagine that the immediate area around where you land is really where you're meant to stay on planets in Starfield. I can't imagine there's going to be many people walking entire planets, probably just because it's not going to be all that fun and not all that interesting. You'll be moving very slowly, and there's probably not a ton to find out there. Technically, it seems like it is possible to fully walk around a planet. It's been kind of loosely confirmed or hinted at, but to me, it almost sounds more like the gameplay loop will be you find a nice spot on a planet, then you return to space and land in a different area to explore different spots, rather than staying on the planet and walking from one point to another. It is described how to go really crazy into Outpost Building, you will need to collect resources and even develop certain character skills first. You can land and just start building immediately, but to get some of the advanced stuff, there is a bit more you'll have to do. Although it sounds like this can be a literal investment in terms of the in-game economy. It's described how Outpost can be connected with ships to set up routes, and the system overall can be a real credits or resource generator for you. You are able to play Starfield solo if you want to. Some traits and skills will be there to buff up your character if you are playing solo, similar to how it worked in other games. But there will of course be companions in Starfield, and you can romance them. In this interview, Todd Howard describes that the 4 Constellation companions are the romanceable ones, although your relationships with some of those companions can change based off the decisions you make. We have heard in the past how companions can get briefly mad at you if you do or say the wrong thing, but also how companions will be playing a larger role here and can even talk for you in certain instances in dialogue. You'll be able to dismiss your companions just like you could in past games. You could assign them to an outpost or one of your ships you're not using. That's what Todd Howard said. That last line's pretty interesting because it does confirm that we can have multiple spaceships and basically cycle between them to some degree. It'd be cool if there was a literal spaceship garage we can go to somewhere. We get some more details on spaceships and even how exactly space piracy will work. Every ship in Starfield is described as being built using the same builder we saw during the Direct, and every single ship is upgradable, although there will be some restrictions on upgrading and how you can use stolen ships, at least at first.
When you steal one, we do make you register it. If you want to modify it or use it in those ways, you have to spend credits to go register it. And that's for us to keep it from the economy kind of spiraling in those ways. You can fly it around, but if you want to mess with it, you register it, and then you go through that whole loop of upgrading it. I will say that that's a very deep system, and one that we expect for late game. It's not like you start the game and then you're going to get right into shipbuilding. It costs a lot of credits. It is, in a good way, a very complicated system, and one that it was more of a longer term thing in the game. You can easily upgrade your ship, like just go in and say, I want to improve these weapons. I want to improve the grav drive or the shields. That's very, very easy to do. But where you go in that mode and you break it apart and you're building, that is a whole mode onto itself that is more of a long-term play kind of thing.
That sounds like a pretty interesting system to me. I imagine registering stolen spaceships will be quite expensive, but for balance reasons, it does make sense. There definitely has been some initial fan pushback on the idea of spaceship customization being something that's late game and expensive, but I'm sure in the first week we'll get some kind of mod or trainer that will open this up more completely. And secondly, you do want the economy of Starfield to make sense, and having spaceships be an investment does kind of make sense. From past interviews, we have heard how you truly have 2 options of buying or building your ship. So if you want to put in the time to actually gather up all the resources and build it yourself, or just make some credits and buy your way to the top. I imagine if you do set up some successful outposts early on, this may end up really paying off with your spaceship investments. But we also hear how some of the ship modules are going to have interior components on them, so you do have some degree of choice with interiors of your spaceship. As well as Todd Howard says, you technically can have an all-robot spaceship, preferably led by Vasco. In this interview, Todd Howard also gives a bit of a more expanded answer on why Starfield is locked at 30 FPS on Xbox.
Ultimately, look, we boil it down to we wanted the consistency. Game is running great, but we don't want players to ever think about it. We have obviously seen other games that have performance modes, and we lean toward consistency overall, and we talk to our fans and hear that from everybody. So we're feeling really great. Game feels great in your hands. And I would say, look, developers know this, but there are things that you can do to make that look and feel great. Things like motion blur, how fast the game refreshes or reacts to a controller input, all of those things matter to something feeling great. And I can honestly say this is the best feeling game that we've had.
I'm not sure motion blur can truly make up for 30 FPS completely, but I'm definitely interested to get to try this on day one, and will reserve my full opinions on the 30 FPS in Starfield until I could actually play it at 30 FPS, as well as we get some high-level comments on Starfield modding, and I think even a hint at some paid mod system.
Yeah, I think Starfield is going to be kind of a modder's paradise. It's part of our DNA here. We've been doing it for over 20 years. One of the things that I'll call out is it's important for us not just to enable that, but to participate, right? To make it easy for them, to make this where they can make it not just a hobby, but a career. We've had a lot of great success there. So looking forward to what everyone's going to do with Starfield, just like cannot imagine.
So on one hand, I'm definitely hopeful for Starfield modding. Look at all the systems and even just all of the planets that are in this game. It seems like the modding possibilities will be immense. But I do still have some questions about what that entails. Are console mods coming back? This is one of those things that I've been desperately wanting people to ask Todd Howard in an interview, but nobody has thus far. Are we getting mod tools day one, or perhaps not until mid or late 2024? With some past games like Fallout 4, we actually had to wait a decent amount of time for mod tools to finally release. And in the case of Fallout 76, it was supposed to be getting mods, and well, we still don't have them. So, as well as after the direct, I did kind of have this thought about maybe Starfield's just going to be a bit too hard to mod. Not in the sense that the tools will be more difficult to use, because that's already a pretty big issue, but rather that the game looks phenomenal. These are some incredibly high quality and incredibly detailed assets. And there are definitely a fair few mods out there right now that would just look out of place in Starfield because they just don't look good enough. Starfield is such a good looking game that I think it's going to raise the bar for modding. So I wouldn't be shocked if we have this issue where the bar is almost a little bit too high for a lot of the community made mods, at least early on. And if you're just looking for some weapon ports from Fallout 4, they may feel a bit out of place in Starfield because they're just not going to be high enough quality. But of course, there's also that quote at the end about having active partnerships with modding and wanting to have modders make a career out of it. And to me, it just screams like paid mods are totally coming back, right? In my opinion, I think paid mods are going to return to Skyrim first and then likely to Starfield later. I think little quotes like this from Todd Howard are a big clue that they internally have some plans around that. But then there was also a fair amount of rapid fire stuff throughout this one. Todd Howard confirms Starfield will not have fishing, but it will have a large font mode, likely similar to what they have for Fallout 76. When asked about Steam Deck compatibility, he mentioned talking about it down the road, which makes me think that he either doesn't think it'll be a thing or doesn't know if it'll be a thing. When asked about black holes, he chose not to answer, which I think is kind of a big answer. Starfield will likely have black holes involved in its main story. There is a radio station in Starfield, but it's going to be local to a certain area. So you'll only actually be able to listen to that radio when you're around a certain location. And it seems like gravity and gravity manipulation will be a big theme in Starfield, and characters will have opinions on that.
And we do get into, with the game, gravity and how that affects people in this universe, how they bend it, how they feel about that, and so forth. So
overall, I think it was an okay interview. Definitely not the best Todd Howard interview out there, but also definitely not the worst. As of right now, we don't have that much longer to wait. We're just a bit over 2 months away from being able to play Starfield, if you buy early access, that is. It's not crazy to think that 2 months from right now, reviewers could have the game in their hands. With all of that in mind, hopefully you guys found this one informative, and if you want to hear more about Starfield, check out this video on the other recent Todd Howard interview where he shares a bunch of additional details.